Chapter 2. A Top Student and a Top Golfer. In the fall of 1950, when Kiki was 17 years old, she arrived at Cornell, a university known for top academics, demanding and knowledgeable professors, long, cold winters, and a strikingly beautiful natural landscape. Kiki was one of 7 Jewish women in the freshman class. All 7 were housed on the same floor in Clara Dixon Hall. They became friends and remained close all their lives. Later, Kiki suggested, tongue-in-cheek, that it could have been happenstance that the 7 Jewish women in the class were housed together, or perhaps the Jewish women were grouped together in an effort to make them feel more comfortable. But she knew the real reason. They'd been segregated. Sororities and fraternities, too, were segregated. Some were for Jews, most were for Christians, with no overlap permitted. She felt snubbed when non-Jewish friends she'd met during a summer waitressing job avoided her on campus and issued no sorority invitations. Kiki, still known to her friends by her childhood nickname, joined a Jewish sorority, Alpha Epsilon Phi, and majored in government. She took part-time clerical jobs to supplement her scholarships and joined the Women's Self-Governance Association. Later, when asked to talk about her time at Cornell, she often mentioned the different rules that applied to men and women at the university. Women were required to live in dormitories, whereas men were allowed to find independent housing in town. Women had to sign into the dormitory each night. They had to be back in the dormitory by 10 p.m. on weekdays, midnight on Fridays, and 1 a.m. on Saturdays. If a woman wasn't back on time, she was locked out and had to find somewhere else to sleep that night. Kiki later admitted to having found herself locked out of the dormitory, but only once. Even at Cornell, there was pressure on women to hide their intelligence, to make the men feel like they were smarter, even though, because of quotas and thus higher admission standards for women, the women were often stronger students. Kiki, still feeling that she needed to live up to the image of a fun sorority girl, found obscure libraries so others wouldn't know how much she studied. Kiki met Martin David Ginsburg, known as Marty, during her first year at Cornell. Marty was 18, a year older than Kiki. He was a second-year student and social chairman of the Jewish fraternity, Tau Delta Phi. He came from a well-to-do Long Island family. His father was vice president of the Federated department store chain, the corporation that now owns Target stores, among others. One of the 6 other Jewish women on Kiki's floor, Irma Hilton, was dating a man who was friends with Marty. Irma and her boyfriend introduced Marty and Kiki, even though both were dating others. Kiki had a boyfriend from Camp Chinua, who was then a law student at Columbia. Marty had a girlfriend at Smith. But as Irma explained, the weeks between visits with an out-of-town boyfriend were long, and the nights in Ithaca were cold. Besides, Marty was the owner of a gray Chevrolet. Irma had the idea that if Kiki and Marty would get together, the 4 of them could go places in Marty's car. Kiki described their first meeting as a blind date, but Marty later revealed that the date was only blind on Kiki's side. "I cheated," he said. The date was arranged after Marty told Irma's boyfriend that he thought Kiki was really cute. Kiki and Marty were friends for a full year before their relationship turned romantic, enough time for them to get to know each other without the complications of courtship. "He would tell me everything on his mind," Kiki said. "Not a bad way to start a relationship." Marty was the first to fall in love. He came to see who Kiki was underneath, and he wooed her with promises that he respected her intelligence and admired her quiet intensity. Marty was the first boy she'd ever met who cared that she had a brain. Most men, she felt, actually preferred a woman didn't have much of a brain. She also came to realize that Marty was much smarter than her Columbia Law School boyfriend. She felt it was Marty's deep confidence in himself, born of his own superior intelligence, that prevented him from feeling intimidated by her. One of Marty's friends said, "Ruth was a wonderful student and a beautiful young woman. Most of the men were in awe of her, but Marty was not." On the surface, the two were as different as could be. Whereas Kiki was reserved and careful, Marty was gregarious and irreverent. Many years later, after decades of marriage, and after Kiki became Justice Ginsburg of the United States Supreme Court, she and Marty were at a social gathering, consisting mostly of her former clerks, when Marty, unbeknownst to her, taped a sign on her back that said, "Her Highness." With Marty as her partner, Kiki didn't have to live up to the cultural expectations to be the fun-loving life of the party. Marty willingly took on that responsibility. Once Kiki stopped hiding her intelligence, it became evident to her peers that she was scary smart. She often sat cross-legged, reading, while the others played bridge or gossiped. She enjoyed Gilbert and Sullivan, sometimes playing selections on the piano. While later portraits showed her as serious and even dour, Irma Hilton said she was actually a lot of fun. It was just that she had her priorities straight. She never partied until her work was done. Marty, modest as well as irreverent, was always eager to shine the spotlight on Kiki. He joked that at Cornell she was a top student, while he was a top golfer. Indeed, he was a talented golfer and a member of the college golf team. He started college as a pre-med student, but said he dropped chemistry when he discovered that the labs interfered with his golfing schedule. During Kiki's second year of college, in keeping with her goal of becoming a high school history teacher, she did some student teaching at a local high school. She discovered that high school teaching was just not her cup of tea. Meanwhile, the nation was in the grip of Senator Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare. Cornell professor Marcus Singer was indicted before a grand jury in Washington, D.C. when he refused to tell the House Un-American Activities Committee about his associates in a wartime communist study group. Professor Singer admitted his participation in the group, but invoked his Fifth Amendment right to silence when the committee demanded that he divulge the names of others who participated. He was arraigned on a contempt charge, and as a result, Cornell University relieved him of his teaching duties, while allowing him to remain in his job as a researcher. Kiki became protege and research assistant to Cornell professor of government Robert Cushman, who was supervising the university's Studies in Civil Liberties program. Professor Cushman impressed upon his students that McCarthy's committee was violating the constitutional rights of Americans and essentially conducting a widespread witch hunt, thereby estranging America from its most basic values. Kiki first felt the desire to become a lawyer when she understood that the lawyers representing the accused in the McCarthy hearings, while of course working for profit, were also trying to repair the wounds in the society. She also tied her interest in law and justice to her Jewish education and heritage, noting that demand for justice runs through the entirety of Jewish tradition. Because she liked reading, thinking, and laying out arguments, it seemed to her that law was a better career match for her than teaching high school. Meanwhile, she and Marty were growing together as soulmates. They felt equally enraged at McCarthy's attempts to ruin the career of a Cornell professor because he had been a member of a communist group as a student. They shared walks through the art squad and drives past the lake. Kiki learned to play golf. She was a frequent guest at Marty's home on Long Island. Marty's mother, Evelyn, took a liking to Kiki and took Kiki, who, after all, had recently lost her own mother, under her wing. One summer, Kiki worked as a clerk in one of Marty's father's department stores. It was there, on the streets of Long Island, that Kiki encountered for the first time a test that she had trouble passing, her driving test. She had to take the test 5 times before she passed. Marty and Kiki decided they wanted to go into the same profession so they could understand each other's work and support each other. The idea, Marty explained, was to be in the same discipline so there would be something you could talk about, bounce ideas off of, know what each other was doing. Business was out because the Harvard Business School didn't accept women, and Marty wanted to go to Harvard. So they decided to become lawyers. even though Marty suspected Kiki had already made up her mind that this was what she wanted. Nathan was dismayed when he learned that his daughter wanted to go to law school. The legal profession was all but closed to women, so there didn't seem much sense in Kiki trying to become a lawyer. Teaching to him was a much more logical choice. Moreover, his own business had never recovered since Celia's death, and he knew he wouldn't be able to support her should she be unable to find a job. Kiki believed that Celia had wanted her to be a high school history teacher simply because a possibility like law had never occurred to her. Kiki felt confident that if Celia were alive and saw such a possibility open to her daughter, she would have encouraged her. One of Kiki's cousins, Jane Giverts, later came across a letter Kiki had written in 1953, revealing self-doubts about her aptitude for law, but explaining that she was determined to see if she could get into law school, despite being told from all sides that it was more appropriate for a woman to be a teacher. Nathan felt better about the idea of law school after Kiki and Marty announced their engagement. Since she would have a man to support her, it didn't matter as much if she would be unable to work in her chosen profession. Marty graduated and was accepted to Harvard Law School. Kiki, who was ready to shed her childhood nickname and become Ruth, still had 1 year left at Cornell. She came up with an idea. She would take her 4th year of college at the Cornell Law School and then join Marty at Harvard, where they'd both be second-year students. She proposed this idea to the dean at Harvard, who told her this would not work because she would get no credit at Harvard for courses taken at Cornell. Ruth had no desire to go through the 1st year of law school twice, so instead, after Marty left for his 1st year of Harvard, now driving a green Pontiac instead of his gray Chevrolet, Kiki spent her last year at Cornell taking art and music classes. Later, she said it was the year she most enjoyed her studies. Ruth graduated with high honors in government, with distinction in all subjects. She was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and because she was the woman with the highest academic average, she graduated as class marshal. She was admitted to Harvard Law School and offered a generous scholarship. She and Marty were married in Marty's living room in Rockville Center, New York, the same month she graduated from Cornell. The ceremony was performed by the rabbi from the synagogue Celia and Nathan had belonged to for years. The wedding was small, with only 18 guests, a number representing the Hebrew symbol for life. Ruth and Marty would use the money saved by having a small wedding for a European honeymoon, a car trip through France, Italy, and Switzerland. Ruth's soon-to-be mother-in-law gave her advice about how to have a happy marriage. Just before the ceremony, Evelyn sat her down and said, "Ruth, remember, in every good marriage, it helps to be a little hard of hearing." She then presented Ruth with a pair of earplugs. Ruth said that whereas she didn't particularly need those earplugs in her marriage, they definitely came in handy later with law faculty colleagues.